If we do not have a speaker on January 3rd or 4th or 5th, then the House arguably cannot count the electoral votes on the 6th. Partner with the Democrats to spend and send money to Ukraine, authorize spying on Americans, and blow the budget. And now you want to put him back in power? Sending money to Ukraine, waving foreign flags in the halls of Congress. Sick. So who else are we going to pick? Mike Johnson is in for the fight of his life. Running for speaker again. The last time he became the speaker, it was only after a long battle, and he became the consensus candidate. But a lot of people are not happy with him at all. And people like Chip Roy and Thomas Massie are indicating that they will not be voting for Mike Johnson. Now, the problem with this is Mike Johnson, if we do not have a speaker on January 3rd or 4th or 5th, then the House arguably cannot count the electoral votes on the 6th because you can't do anything without a speaker. That's the first order of business. And other speaker races took a lot longer than 3 days to elect a speaker. And the Democrats are not going to be helping the Republicans. So how does the math add up? Just the News says it's going to be difficult. The House elections returned a narrow Republican majority, and now it's only 220 seats. And other people are not going to be in positions of power, and so we'll skip the math, but it's a very tight margin. They say some people like Trump are endorsing Mike Johnson, but others are not. Massie, Victoria Spars, and others are saying not going to happen. Here's what Thomas Massie said. Trump came out and endorsed Mike Johnson, but Johnson doesn't have Massie's support. He says, look, I respect and support President Trump, but his endorsement of Mike Johnson is going to work out as well as his endorsement of Paul Ryan. We've seen Johnson partner with the Democrats to spend and send money to Ukraine, authorize spying on Americans, and blow the budget. And now you want to put him back in power? You can see there was a battle over this that has been taking place between Newt Gingrich as well. Gingrich came out and says, look, I don't understand this, Massie. What the contrarian House Republicans think that they're going to gain by opposing Johnson. They have no one who can get more votes. They risk crippling Trump's electoral win on January 6th. They're in effect allies of Democrats. I challenge them to explain what their end game is other than noise. And Thomas Massie responded. He said, okay, hey, Newt, guess what? Challenge accepted. First, let me note that the vote for Mike camp is not trying to make the case that Mike Johnson is endowed with qualities necessary to lead our conference. Even if you've limited yourself here to procedural justifications for his speakership rather than telling us why he is a good or capable leader. And that's kind of been where we've landed on this. Like Mike Johnson, we are not a fan of many of his policies or what he tried to do with that last spending attempt or his instant money for foreign countries over Americans. We're not happy about any of that. But we also don't want a Democrat speaker, because that would be much worse. So I think that has been mostly the equation we've been operating under. He's not our favorite, but he is the only guy that we've got essentially. So who else are we going to pick? So even if Mike's entire goal, says Thomas Massie, Mike Johnson, is to do everything Trump wants without debate or question, which I would argue is not healthy for Congress, he's not going to even be good at it. He already demonstrated this month that he won't tell the president what is achievable and what is not achievable in the House, and he lacks the situational awareness himself to know what can pass and what cannot. What do we hope to gain, you ask, Newt? A competent speaker who has the will and the ability to capitalize on this once-in-a-decade opportunity, okay? Johnson's not up to the task. Also, we want a speaker who inspires the public and who can make our case in the media so we can keep the majority for the second half of Trump's term. Johnson nearly led us to the minority in what was a banner year for Trump. He's going to lose us the majority in 26. Newt said, no one can get more votes. Massie responds, it's somewhat ridiculous to assert that Mike Johnson is the only member of Congress electable to speaker. He was only electable the first time because he hadn't held any type of leadership position, nor had he ever fought for anything, so no one disliked him, and everyone was tired of voting. He won by being the least objectionable candidate, and he no longer possesses that title. You also say that we risk crippling Trump's win. He says, oh, come on, this argument's a scare tactic, meant to stampede the masses, plain and simple. There's no legal or parliamentary argument for nullifying the national election if a speaker is not in place on January 6th. That's our other concern. Well, a lot of the analysis that we've read, and as we know, Congress can basically do whatever it wants. They set their own rules and then they break them all the time. Just look at HR 503 with the J6 committee. They do whatever they want. The courts don't care. They say separation of powers, so do whatever. So who knows what's going to happen? I mean, quite frankly, he says there's no argument for nullifying the election. So are they going to then have a pro tem temporary speaker? And do the Democrats need to get on board, or do the Republicans need to be on board? So we'd like some more meat on those bones. Number 4, they're also allies of Democrats. He says, you know what? No, I'm not. Actually, it is Mike Johnson who routinely passes major legislation like Ukraine, Omnibus, FISA. I forgot about that from Mike. With only a minority of Republicans, and remember Mike came out, I was opposed to it, but then I talked to somebody at the CIA and now I'm for FISA. Here's the roll call for the motion to table the motion to vacate last summer. Pelosi and Jeffries teamed up to save Johnson. Now, in closing, the emperor has no clothes. The entire conference knows it. No one's going to say it. The general public knows it too. Don't shoot the messengers. We're not voting for Johnson. He's terrible. So you can see. He also pointed this out, and this was one that made our blood boil. Said, let's pause to remember this moment in Congress when Mike Johnson gave the Democrats the billions of dollars they wanted for Ukraine. Remember that? The House Sergeant at Arms threatened to fine me for sharing this video. That same man still works for Mike Johnson. So here you go. Look at that. In America. That's our Congress. These total scammers. Sending money to Ukraine, waving foreign flags in the halls of Congress. Sick. All right, so you can see why Thomas Massie's upset. And I can empathize wholeheartedly with it. He also said, remember Paul Ryan, who was terrible? Yeah, we don't want to do that again either. And said that other votes may be difficult to get. Someone said, right now, I don't believe he has the votes on Friday when it's time to vote for Johnson. Republicans are hoping to avoid the leadership chaos that happened previously. Historically, a small GOP majority means that Johnson can only afford a single Republican defection. Democrats have signaled they're not going to help him at all, but he's got a lot of people who are not on board. Andy Harris of Maryland, Andy Biggs, Arizona, Victoria Spartz, Indiana, Thomas Massie in Kentucky, and Chip Roy. Chip Roy had this fiery exchange explaining he may not be on board either and talking about some alternatives. Here is Chip Roy.
Is Mr. Johnson going to have the support to keep his role as Speaker? What do you think?
Well, good morning, Ashley, and Happy New Year to all the listeners and viewers out there.
Same to you.
Look, Victoria's a good friend, and Thomas is a good friend, and they raise reasonable concern. I remain undecided, as do a number of my colleagues, because we saw so many of the failures last year that we are concerned about that might limit or inhibit our ability to advance the president's agenda. I respect, like Thomas, that President Trump supports Mike. I like Mike. He's a good friend. Let's consider what happened the week before Christmas. We violated the 72-hour rule twice, which means we didn't have time to read a bill. We had to have Elon and Vivek and the president and JD come in to kill a 1,500-page monstrosity, cut it down to 100 pages. It still spent $110 billion unpaid for. And do my colleagues say, oh, but that's all just discretionary spending? We also passed $200 billion that is taking money out of Social Security, transfer it, which will hasten the bankruptcy of Social Security by 6 months. That was all the week before Christmas, Ashley. That's a problem. That's not how we should do business. We racked up $300 billion of additional deficit spending after the election. We spent $1.7 trillion last year with more Democrat votes than Republican votes. We gave another $61 billion to Ukraine. My friend Victoria, she's from Ukraine. She has a heart for the Ukrainians, but she understands giving $61 billion to Ukraine after Mike Johnson promised to secure the border first, that's a problem. So we need to have a plan before January 3rd. The speaker needs to speak to it if he wants to have all of our support.
Yeah, and I have to follow up at this point, Congressman. Does he have that support or not?
Yeah, right now I don't believe that he has the votes on Friday, and I think we need to have the conference get together so that we can get united. And people say, well, Chip, who would you choose otherwise? There are a lot of great members of Congress. Mike's a friend, and maybe he can answer the call and he can deliver an agenda and a plan. Byron Donalds is a good man and a good friend. I supported him. I nominated him 2 years ago. Jim Jordan's a good man and a good friend. There are other members of leadership in the conference who could do the job. But what we need to do is unite around.
I think the problem with Byron Donalds is that he's too young, and there's a bunch of other older Congress people who are like, I've been here forever. And, you don't get to just become speaker without working your way up through leadership. You got to run these committees for a long time and then be the chairman, and then you're like this natural heir to that position. But if you have another figure like a Byron Donalds who checks the right boxes, can we just accelerate that? Let's put a unifying leader in charge who can get everybody in line. Maybe they've been in Congress. So that sounds like a reasonable proposal.
A plan to deliver for the president. Right now, I do not believe the conference has that. The failure before Christmas, I cannot overstate, is a glimpse to come if we don't organize the conference to be able to deliver for the American people. We are not going to be able to bend on the things that matter. You must cut spending if you want inflation to go down and for people to afford to live in this country. We have to secure the border. We can't be going back and forth on that. We have to give the tools, Tom Homan, the president, Stephen Miller, to secure the border.
Yep.
And we've got to have the plans in place by Friday.
I'm skeptical on this for many reasons. I am not a fan of Mike Johnson. I'm not a fan of Democratic leadership. I don't want anything to interfere with J6 or the transition. And so we're stuck in a really hard place at the moment. And we'll see what Mike Johnson does, what the pressure of Trump can bring to this conversation. But if we get to Friday, which is 2 days from the date of this recording, and we do not have a consensus on a speaker, then we are going to be putting ourselves into that position where we end up where we were last time with McCarthy and those votes. And that dragged on for a number of days. So does that postpone us past January 6th? And does that cause more difficulty at the very outset of Trump's term? Can you rely on Mike Johnson to rise to the occasion now that he's got Trump providing him cover, be beholden to Trump? And so maybe he's an acceptable person because he's not old Mike Johnson who was operating under Biden, who was being pushed around. Now he's got Trump who can push him around and he can reform himself, or is that just wishful thinking? So a lot of things to consider here. I think ultimately I would defer to Trump's requests and to Trump's demands personally. And I also know that Chip Roy and Thomas Massie were no fans of Trump at the very beginning. They were Ron DeSantis guys. And we have love for Ron DeSantis. We just think that they should have sat that one out and endorsed Trump from the beginning. So I'm also skeptical of that as well. I know there are times when politicians come out and they say, we're fiscal now. We're suddenly fiscal people and we're sick of Mike Johnson. Is that genuine? Probably. Is there another parallel motive for that? Maybe. So we keep watchful eye on this with our skepticism, but we want outcomes and we don't want to go through a bickering for several days where we end up with Mike Johnson anyways, okay? Because all that does is it impedes the narrative of a smooth transition. Republicans are in chaos. Remember what they did with H-1B? Caitlin Collins and the rest of them were going hyperventilation mode all over CNN. There's war, MAGA, civil war, constantly. Like they'd love that. We want outcomes. We want results. And the Republicans better not squander this.